we assess in the first place. And so we think really carefully when we're planning our courses about what types of content and skills we want our students to have mastered at the end of the courses. And so when we come up with assessments and assignments that are aligning our learning objectives very clearly, we are actually helping our students focus on what we have decided are the most important aspects of the course. And of course, when we give them timely feedback, we are not only letting them know which parts of the course, which parts of their skill sets, etc., they're doing well in, but we're also helping them to identify what aspects of their work they need to put more emphasis on or seek extra help. And of course, ultimately, we are using our assessments to determine whether the students have actually met our benchmarks for passing the course and being prepared for future courses. So the very best types of assessments are those that are not just giving our students a grade in a summative way, but also as we're working towards that, they are improving their skills and deepening their understanding of course content. And so with all of this in mind, we think that authentic assessment can be really helpful in this regard because so what is it? Authentic assessment is really just trying to take the skills and knowledge sets that our students are being exposed to and practicing in the classroom, in their coursework, and having them apply that and test it in realistic, real-world type of situations that are very relevant to their future disciplinary professions. Sorry, I'm full of hay fevery stuff and I have a little frog in my throat, so I apologise for that. But so that said, because these are real world situations, the assessments then, authentic assessments, are requiring our students to, as I said, apply their theoretical knowledge and skills to the task. But because, as we all know, real world situations are messy, they're nuanced, they're complex, then these types of authentic assessments are also really encouraging our students to think about constraints that they might be facing if they were really trying to do this in practice. And then we're asking them to bring an element of judgment and sometimes even innovation to how they are going to approach or solve a particular task. And then again, because real world situations are definitely complex, then authentic assessments are actually asking our students to integrate a number of different skills and knowledge sets to be able to address the task. And then finally, unlike more traditional tests or assignments, which can often be one and done type of tasks, authentic assessments, as we'll talk about later, are iterative in nature. And in receiving feedback on their progress, students are then able to consult resources, work on refining and improving their performance. And of course, as an added benefit, in this type of assignment where there's no one single way to approach the task, there's no one single right or wrong answer, that makes it really very difficult to cheat. So why else might we use authentic assessments? Well, we all know that one of the biggest predictors of student completion and success is intrinsic motivation. And of course, a lot of factors play into that. And one of them, of course, is the sense of competency. So, and what we're about to talk about now, of course, doesn't just apply to students, it applies to all of us as human beings, what motivates us, what gets us enthusiastic about any kind of task. But in this case, we're talking about our students. So Students will work hard and remain motivated with a task if they believe that they actually have the skill set to complete the task. Otherwise, they can feel really quite overwhelmed. They don't know where to begin and they give up before they've really even started. But of course, another way that they will stick with it is if they can see that their competency, their skill set is actually improving as they are working their way through the course. And then another thing about authentic assessments is that we are giving our students some control over what type of task they might want to do and how they might want to go about that. And so when we give them some autonomy like that, they can see a very direct link between their choices, their subsequent actions, and then the outcome of what they're trying to do. And then they get to decide whether they should modify that approach in some way. So they feel like they have a sense of control over what they're doing. And all of us like to have a sense of control over how we go about our normal tasks. And again, all of us will be motivated by a task that we see the value of doing, that it doesn't just feel like busy work, that it seems as if we are going to learn something valuable out of this, or we're going to contribute something valuable by doing this particular task. And so authentic assessments, by letting our students see how their coursework is applied in the real world and their future professions, that really again helps them see the value and keeps their motivation levels high. And then finally, there's this sense of relatedness. And I don't just mean here the sense of relatedness between the theory of the coursework and the application and practice, but also a sense of relatedness that our students can feel between themselves and various other types of social groups, whether that is between the student and other students as they're working together in teams, or whether it's between the student and their faculty mentor, their student and their professional cohort or task, or even sometimes, depending on the particular task, if it's an experiential type of authentic assessment, that can even give the student a sense of relatedness to the larger community. And again, whenever any of us work on things that we see the bigger picture, that helps us to stay motivated in our tasks. And in this case, it helps our students to stay motivated towards completing the course and being successful. So with that, I am going to pass it over now to Jodie, and she's going to just walk through some examples of the ways in which typical tests and authentic tests or tasks are similar and different. And you just tell me when you want me to move the slide over and I will do so.
Perfect, thank you. So these next 3 slides are full of text. As an instructional designer, I'd encourage you not to make slides like this for your course, but we wanted to provide these examples to you so you can review them later. So if you're one who loves to read the slides, try to reel back and listen for now, and then come back and really dig in later. There's research that has shown that if someone tries to read the slides and listen at the same time, they typically do neither well. So take a moment, sit back, relax, and you can return to these later. We'll provide them to you all so that you can come back and really dig into these tables. But for now, I'm just going to kind of give you an overview of the things that are here so that we can kind of talk in a more general sense about these authentic assessments and typical kind of multiple choice style tests. So in a typical multiple choice style test, there's often one correct answer. So you give a question, they have to pick A, B, C, or D, where in reality, there's, for most tasks we're given at work or in real life, there's no immediately clear-cut answer that you can choose. So an authentic assessment there are multiple ways to approach a problem, and giving students this type of assessment gives them the opportunity to approach problems in different ways. It also gives them the opportunity to justify their choices, and it can help them reflect on those choices that they made, as well as the process they used to solve the problem. With this, I like to think I have 2 small kiddos and they're learning math and what I call new math or Common Core math. So when they attack a math problem, they do it in a completely foreign way from the way I learned. If they get 56 plus 56, they break it apart and do it in all sorts of different ways, where I do it the old school way, where you add it up and carry over. But students can attack all different problems in different sorts of ways, not just with math, but field related as well. So this kind of gives them that opportunity to look at a problem and go at it from different angles. Again, typical test, we don't give students questions in advance because we want to, oh, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. So in a typical test, yeah, we don't give the students the questions in advance. We might give them a study guide or a review session, but we want to typically limit cheating. So we don't give them those questions. Whereas an authentic task, it's best if the task is known ahead of time to give students the opportunity to clarify expectations, ask for support, work with friends, do some research. And if you think about this, it's much like the real world, right? We're not given, for an example, this presentation. Meg and I have had a couple weeks to prepare for this, right? We were given a task. We checked in to make sure what we were doing was right. We did some research. We pulled the slides together. We revised. We've actually done similar presentations before, so we took the feedback from that to apply to this. So we want to give students the opportunity to do work like they would in the real world. I was a K-12 teacher for years before this, and I'd always tell people I learned more in my first year of teaching than I did in my entire experience in college. And using these authentic tasks really helps to push the experiences they have here at Ohio University toward that first year, right? We want students to experience things like they would in their real professions, but give them the opportunity to safely fail and safely get feedback and learn from those mistakes and learn appropriate processes to get where they're going. All right, Meg, can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. No, it takes a minute sometimes.
I don't know what's going on here. I've been pressing the button like a Looney Tunes. Oh dear. Oh.
Can you use the arrows in the bottom corner to move forward?
Mm-hmm. Let me see. I'm trying to get rid of us all together here. Did that work?
There we go. Perfect. Yes, thank you.
So sorry.
It's okay. So this first point, sometimes, not always, because many of our faculty are wonderful at writing connected problems, but sometimes typical tests can be disconnected from real world constraints or contexts. So I'm a former special education teacher, and in school I may have learned about different disabilities, different interventions that work for different types of students. So on a typical test, I may be asked about characteristics of that disability or appropriate interventions for different things. Whereas if I was given an authentic task, I'd have the opportunity to really think about everything I'd learned holistically and see more. So if this was a case study of a student, I may be given test results and interviews with parents and checklists from teachers and different things. And I can take all of those different things and nuances and really apply it to what I have learned about students, about learning, about different disabilities, about different interventions, and pull it all together, kind of like Meg was talking about, and integrate all of those skills and knowledge into something that I might use later.
Oh, I got a bit carried away there.
Yeah.
I'm getting fired for being the driver of the thing. Back we go. Sorry.
Okay. And following from that, typical tests usually focus on individual skills or facts, where authentic tasks demand integration, just like I was saying, of all those different things, and often test those higher order thinking skills. So if you've been at some of our other sessions, you may know that you can write multiple choice tests to assess some of those higher order thinking skills, but this really gets into the application and the knowledge and the use of different pieces and pulling it all together. Okay, now I think we're ready for the next one.
There we go.
Thank you. A typical test or even an essay test are usually designed on the basis of a model answers, or we use rubrics to assess so that they can easily be scored. And I know this is part of the thing we'll talk about later, but authentic tasks are typically a bit more hard to score. We need to really think about the parameters we set for our students to form this basis for evaluation. I like to do this using scaffolded tasks, or encourage faculty to use scaffold things. So maybe early in the semester, we offer students a case study and we walk through it with them and give them different ideas and ask them to ask questions. And then moving forward, we may have them in a group where they do a similar activity, and you know, that's building upon that because they have other voices and other people to work with. And after that, there's always this feedback cycle if we can include it, so they can learn from those choices. And finally, maybe then they get a case study where they have to go at it alone. So building up that independence as you work through these more authentic tasks. Okay. And so students on typical tests only get one chance to show their learning, but if you can do these iterative tasks, they're tasks where students get feedback and then can revise their work. They can show how they've learned throughout, and reflection and different pieces can really help them build those skills as opposed to just responding to a task. On typical tests, we usually provide a score. So they get a test, they have an A, B, C, or D. But on these authentic tasks, we want students to really learn about themselves, so learn about the skills that they have and then how to apply that knowledge using their skills. And the goal, like I said earlier, is to improve that future performance. We want our students to leave here and be ready to go and do those tasks that they need to do, so that they can, you know, when someone on their job says, oh, I learned so much my first year, they can feel confident going into that first year, ready to attack those tasks and problems they may encounter. Okay, next slide, Meg. So these next two slides, again, we're kind of going to go over them. You can come back later and take a look in more depth, but it looks at different disciplines and how they more closely reflect real world situations than, say, a test. So again, you may look at them at your convenience. What they all have in common is that they expect the students to apply the knowledge and skill sets they have learned in their coursework to these real life situations appropriate to their discipline. So yesterday or 2 days ago, if you were at the session with Lindsay Rudabaugh, she talked a lot about the kind of the spectrum of active learning, experiential learning, and authentic assessment, and how they kind of all are very similar and may overlap in some places. So when you see these, for example, computer science may be asked to develop a website or troubleshoot a particular problem. You know, some of that could be active learning. So they might do that in class and have, you know, get feedback from their peers. It could also be an authentic assessment where they're asked to do that and then revise it to improve. And it could be an experience where they're doing it for a client, potentially in the field. So, you know, these things don't have to be the big final project always. You can integrate types of authentic assessment or types of active learning that use authentic assessment throughout the course without it having to, you know, always be that big final summative assessment. Can we move to the next slide? So here's another couple examples. Again, you can come back and check them out later. So just to go over one, so in psychology, they might look at a case study from multiple theoretical positions, right? So You could take things always a step further and do, you know, have these case studies and then present about them later, or whatever it might be. But again, it doesn't have to be this really big, complex assignment. These authentic assessments can be smaller and can work toward a larger goal. All right, with that, I'm going to pass it back to Meg to talk about some of the challenges we see when doing authentic assessments.
Thank you. So I think it's pretty obvious to all of us that we can see what the benefits of doing this type of thing is, but just because, like most things in life, just because it's important and helpful and useful doesn't mean that it's easy, simple and quick. And there is no doubt about it that authentic assessment is time consuming in the planning as well as in the implementation of it. As you're planning your authentic assessments, as Jodie said, we often use the authentic assessment as some kind of culminative, big summative project at the end, but perhaps there could be ways that you could scaffold your learning outcomes into many types of authentic assessments, as Jodie mentioned there, or you just might want to keep some of your more typical types of assessments and assignments as you're going through to help scaffold that learning. So these are things that everybody who's in charge of a particular course, you know what your eventual goals are for your students, and so you have to think about what would work best for you and for your students. And importantly too, we talked about how we're going to be giving some control over to the students on how they go about doing things. So then we have to think about how we will provide support for all of that. And sometimes too, when we are giving control over, that can be very difficult if we are used to taking more of a didactic approach, where we're saying, here's a problem, here's the best way to go about the problem, because we're trying in some ways to show our students how to do things the right way. And this time we're having to let go of some of our control. But when we do that, actually, we're helping to really make our students achieve that larger meta goal that we always have for our students, to help them become more self-directed learners. But again, especially if you have a large class, you have to consider what type of authentic assessment it's going to be, what the scope of it is going to be. Perhaps a large project won't work in your class. So because you simply, if you're having to give feedback, which is always important, of course, but it's really important in large summative types of authentic assessments where they've been working towards that through the semester, then getting them timely feedback is really, really important. So again, depending on your course content, the number of students you have, you will really want to think about whether you want to do mini types of assessments or work towards this larger project. And again, because especially the types of authentic tasks that are taking a large part of the semester, that are dealing with a problem or an issue in some detail, then again, because these are real world situations that are messy and not, immediately, obviously, there's this one way to do it, then the students are going to start and stop. They're going to try things, they're going to reassess that, they're going to come back, they're going to do it again. It definitely takes longer for our students to complete this type of task. And so you need to be thinking about how that is going to play into the rest of your course. What else are you needing your students to do? And so be thinking about both the scope of it and the time that it is going to take for students to do this. Another challenge can be that even though the students can really get on board with the idea of doing something that they see as directly related to their future profession, they get excited about that, as we mentioned, if they haven't had this type of authentic assessment previously, they can be very anxious about their grades. So again, this refers back a little to what Jodie said previously about the importance of actually talking to our students and being very explicit about how their performance is going to be evaluated, what you're looking for, etc., and being upfront about that. And then, of course, here we are in pandemic land and everything is online, and online teamwork in itself can be difficult to coordinate. Online teamwork with all of the other constraints can be even harder. So one of the things that we would recommend, and we always recommend doing this, is sending your class a semester survey and finding out what their particular constraints are. And then once you know what those are, you can think about whether you might want to modify either the depth of the authentic assessment that you've been planning or the time that you are able to give the students so that they can complete the task. And in the resources section at the end, I've added a couple of links to some articles that talk about how to really coordinate online teamwork as effectively as possible. So let's think, okay, well, maybe I want to try this. So what kind of steps should I use to help guide me as I plan this? So of course, we always start with the end in mind. We're always thinking about what our learning outcomes are, and particularly what they call here macro skills. What types of skill sets do you want your students to have mastered by the time they get to the end of the course? And those ones particularly for tasks, authentic assessment tasks that are longer and more detailed in nature. These are the types of ones that you might want to be focusing on. And then, of course, scaffolding the other ones towards that as you build through the semester. And of course, when you think about your learning outcomes and you're bearing in mind that the point of doing an authentic assessment is to give the students relevant application to real world types of situations, you might actually find that some of your learning outcomes simply do not lend themselves to that type of approach. And if that's the case, then that's the case. And you don't have to feel that every single one of your learning outcomes has to be addressed in this particular way. But you can start by thinking about, okay, what types of tasks and eventual assessments then of that task can I have my students do? So you can start by thinking about what the professionals in your field do. And again, for some students who might be more advanced or graduate students who are depending on their backgrounds, of course, may have more skill sets that are professionally applicable than if this was a freshman class or a sophomore class. So you think about, could your students actually do this or something like the professionals do? And then you can form your authentic assessment around that. But if it's not directly related to that, because perhaps your students are just not as advanced to be able to do what professionals can do, we can still think about it's still authentic if we require students to then take the theory and the knowledge and the skills that they're doing in their coursework, and then, as we said earlier, apply that to some kind of a scenario that is nonetheless relevant to their future professional goals. And it's always important to make the assessment feel relevant to the students, but it's particularly important if that task isn't immediately obvious to the students as something that they will be doing or are helping prepare them for the types of things that they will be doing in the future. So always talking about what you're doing and why you're doing it can really help the students, again, see the value of the task. And then again, just as a little hint, sometimes it can be helpful when you're trying to think about what kind of task or scenario you could have your students work on. If you think about your learning objectives in terms of verbs, in terms of doing or some kind of skill set, and then often that can just help us think up some types of scenarios that we can use for that. And then, of course, we have to be thinking about how we are going to evaluate these assessments. And of course, then we have to identify the criteria on which we are going to be basing our grades. And so just like step 2 of backwards design, we are thinking about how we will know that the students have mastered these particular skill sets that we want. And so we're thinking about what kind of criteria are we going to use to grade these, and what are the different levels of expectation within a particular category or a different criterion level. You might say, in order to meet expectations, we expect A, B, C. And if it exceeds expectations, what does that look like to you? And again, always trying to think about keeping it as real world as possible, keeping those criteria as close to your disciplinary professions as possible. And then again, making a rubric with those criteria, with those different performance levels, very explicit, and sharing that with the students before they begin the actual task. And rubrics, of course, aren't just helpful for the students, because now they can clarify certain things, they can work towards their goals in the way that we hope they will, but especially in things like authentic assessments, and when these assessments are very real world and there is no obvious right and wrong answer to it, they lend themselves to being slightly subjective. And so if we have a rubric for our tasks, then that helps us be consistent between different students who are doing different types of tasks, and from one particular assignment to another. It gives us as faculty some consistency. But again, when we're thinking about redesigning any part of our course, it is very time consuming, and particularly in very heavy content classes or large classes, you can feel a little overwhelmed by the very idea of it. And so remember that you certainly don't need to redo everything. In fact, we wouldn't recommend that you start your first foray into authentic assessment by redoing everything. Choose one thing that you think that might work. Let me try that out, and then you can build up towards that, towards making it more and more use of that in future classes, if that's something that you found worked well for you. But remember, you can also use your more typical formative assessments of multiple choice tests, etc., to make sure that the students are learning the basic skill sets that you want, or the basic kind of remembering and understanding, etc., that you can use to build up towards a summative, more authentic assessment. And an example in my field in physiology is that instead of just giving my students a multiple choice test, perhaps I want the authentic assessment to have them evaluate a patient and look at all of their lab results, etc., look at their case history, etc., and come up with a treatment plan. But along the way, of course, I want my students, I want to know that they actually understand the basic physiology of the underlying disease process. So I might want to just use multiple choice tests to test them on their facts and on their understanding before I actually give them more of the in-depth, authentic case report. Perhaps in history, I want them to take a particular event that played out in a particular way in the past, and then change some of the parameters and have them role play a what if this had happened instead type of scenario. And you can still test them on their recall and understanding of what really did happen and why it happened in that particular way before you give them this role play type of event. So again, we just really want to emphasize that you don't have to make everything authentic. You don't have to make everything complex and long to keep it close to real world types of situations. And you can give your low stakes assessments throughout the course that are testing those lower order Bloom's skill sets that you know your students need, that they are able to scaffold, and then apply that to a project at the end of the semester, if that approach works for you. But a final thought, and I think it's quite an important thought, is that there are certainly instances when we don't want to make everything authentic, even if we could make it that way. Well, why not? Because still, and whether we agree with it or not, and I know we probably don't, a lot of graduate entrance exams, some of those are starting to go away a little bit, but professional school exams, medical school exams, and even as I've discovered with two of my children recently graduating from university in the past few years, when they are applying for jobs, often the first part of that interview process is a timed multiple choice test of one form or another. And I feel that we would be doing our students a disservice if the very first time they were exposed to these high stakes situations was in a high stakes situation. So I believe that it's authentic for your students if it's true to the discipline and if it is supporting much needed skill sets and abilities that your students will need to succeed in their particular field, even if it's just to get into the field in the first place. And so again, we've got some more details here that you can look at your leisure if you find them helpful. And here are a couple of ones that I put up about designing effective group work activities. And so with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and open it up for questions and discussions. And actually, we probably don't have a huge amount of time to do what we'd originally wanted, but I wonder if you could pop into the chat. If you're somebody who has used authentic assessment in the past and feels that it was quite successful, or whether you are someone who's just thinking about it, or you've tried to use it and it didn't go the way you hoped it would go, and then we can focus on getting a really nice mixture of questions and collaboration and discussions from more experienced faculty. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind just popping that into the chat. You have done it, it worked, you have done it, you're not sure that you're pleased with it, or you're brand new to this. Melissa, there's a great question that we can get started with. I'm just going to, if there are people who have used authentic assessment in, clusters, or as Brandon says, in some of his assessments, but not all of them, only about 25% of the final score. I would love the people, before I chip in with my thoughts on Melissa's question, which is great, which is, I wonder if authentic assessments generally lead to higher grades. And, that could be a good thing because we are giving our students feedback. We're helping them improve as they go along the way. But is there any concern for grade inflation? So we want to maybe call on some of the people who say that they have done it before and share with us whether you have seen any grade inflation or whether that's a concern for you. So either maybe Sergio or Brandon, anybody want to be brave and have a go?
Yeah, I'll go.
Thank you.
Yeah, I could see where it would be, there would be some grade inflation because the students always come for feedback, especially the better students. And one way I kind of readjust that is with the test. I make the test a little bit more difficult. And I really second what you said about giving multiple choice tests that are timed, because I used to tell that to my students, if you ever take the GMAT, for business students, and I make those tests really, really difficult for them to really study. So yeah, it's a balancing out. I've always used it. I'm new to OU. But one thing I did fail to do is really communicate the value. And that's why some students say, well, why are we doing this? So, what you said, it's really important. That's just, I think that's a big takeaway. I'll have it. I don't know if that's my participation, I guess you could say.
That's great. Yeah, and then I wonder too, if the fact that students are working really hard and improving and getting a higher grade than they otherwise would, is that really grade inflation, or is that just really good teaching and learning going on? So I think sometimes we get a little bit worried about that. But honestly, if our students walk away from our courses knowing how to do things really well, taking transferable skill sets away, and more of them can do that because of the approach that you took, I think that's commendable, honestly.
Yeah, right.
Melissa? And it's about the learning, right? So we want to give our students those opportunities to learn here, and not necessarily focus so much on their grades, but focus on the teaching and learning aspect of our classes.
Not that I necessarily want it to go this way, but I think as we move more towards remote instruction, I am less and less relying, I guess I would say, on objective assessments and trying to move towards more authentic assessments. So I do appreciate the session here. To Melissa's question, yeah, I would say I'm a little bit of a softer grader on the authentic assessments, where I kind of grade more towards effort, as you guys pointed out, than just correctness of answer, and then use a lot of feedback and give a lot of opportunities for answering questions and helping the students get to a higher level of performance before the assignment is due. And the grades on those assignments, like Sergio, my class that I use the authentic assessment primarily for the portion of the grade is a law class, and students struggle, I think, in undergrad with that topic. So the objective assessments are ones that they do a little bit more poorly on, but I do think they have a little bit more enjoyment with the material because it's not the most engaging topic. When I give them basically just a hypothetical with a bunch of legal issues buried in there, and ask them to type up a professional email in response to it. I give them a lot of time in order to do it, but they have much more questions about that than they do about exams or tests and quizzes.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and to that point, I think Megan, I mentioned this, but authentic assessments can be more time consuming. So I know people with larger class sizes often are hesitant to attempt this type of activity, but it seems like, you know, a lot of you who are speaking here use a mix of authentic and those more classic type assessments to kind of balance things out. Because Megan, I will tell you, you have to, when planning a course, think about your students and their learning, but also think about yourself and your time and the ability to give students that time they need for those types of assessments for that, you know, feedback and space to grow.
So there was a question, and I don't know if the person who posted the question was actually able to join us today, but I want to make sure that if you put a question in the pre-survey that we actually address it. So someone asked whether, and I might be misunderstanding the question, but does everything have to be posted online, and how can you know that students are doing what they need to do in terms of, you know, readings and preparation and stuff? Has anybody who has done some of this authentic assessment had difficulty in tracking what your students are doing and whether they are as prepared as they need to be? And again, if I'm misunderstanding that question and the person who posted it is here, please jump right in. It's important that we talk about what you want to talk about. But I'm not seeing anybody unmuting, so I'm going to assume that it's the right interpretation. But yes, people who I can't see everybody here. Could we just go back up through who has done it and who hasn't done it? Not very many people said whether they did or not. Melissa, have you done it before, or was that a question about the authentic assessments because you're new to it, or is it your experience? And then I'm just wondering if you have done it. If you haven't done it, we'll move on. But if you have done it, have you had difficulty getting your students, knowing whether your students are doing what they should be doing?
No, I think anytime that I've done anything like this, I would follow that scaffolding approach, and so there would be tangible checkpoint where they're submitting different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we all know that when we give students things that don't require any kind of a product. So if we say read this paper and then we never refer to the paper ever again, or we never follow up with anything about that paper, then very quickly they know that we are the kind of professor that assigns readings that they don't have to do, and they will do their readings for their other classes. So yeah, I think absolutely what Melissa said about having touch points along the way we give them something, we need them to show us, whatever that looks like for you, they show us that they have actually done it, whether it's even just read this as prep and answer these questions or reflect on this or whatever it is, they show us that they are actually doing the work.
And sometimes that can be wrapping that into the rubric or your grading criteria so that you expect them to show proof from the text or the readings in their work, just so that you can ensure that they're getting those readings.
Mm-hmm. So has anybody who has joined us today who is brand new, does anybody have a burning question that they would love to ask, or you don't even know where to begin asking it, and sometimes the only way to figure it out is to have a go? And then if not, I'll ask the same of our faculty who've done it before. Who did I see? Matthew? Was it Matthew that said he is? Matthew.
Yeah, hi.
Yes, hi.
Yeah, you know, I teach the undergrads, but I also run the grad program, MSA grad program. So, you know, we're much more project based on the grad side, especially this semester approaching. You know, we do capstone work and the particular class that I'm leading. So, and because of the nature and lack of freedom in traveling, you know, I really need a new approach. So that's why I'm interested in this and trying to incorporate it. We're using some more design thinking actually in our capstone. Normally we have 15 projects. We work on them for 10 to 12 weeks. It's really client led, and then we all go to New York and present them over the course of a week. Yeah, not doing much of that. So give them some more freedom to recruit, research, and develop their own projects. But you know, the assessment part of that is really what was interesting to me in terms of joining today.
Okay, great. And those of you who've used it before, is there any burning questions that you might have, or more, equally importantly, we would love your advice to the faculty who are trying this from scratch, some of our more experienced people. Mary, for example, sorry, but I do see that you have done some before. Do you have any advice for people who are just beginning this process? And I should say Mary Tucker, because there might be more than one Mary and I can't see, it just says +13 on my screen at the moment. Mary is still with us. She might not be. Okay, anybody? Mark, where's Mark? I can always, Mark might have had to go as well, because we're getting very close to 1 o'clock. Any final words of encouragement? Oh, Mary says, yes, I've used this approach, but I'm speechless. Oh dear, I need to follow up with you about that.
Okay, I can speak to it, and I like the way you said scaffolding, and I know that Melissa said she used that too. But if you have a big project and you're working with undergrads, it's really best to break it down into small components and have those due along, and then the entire project due at the end. So they can adjust and get better as they go along. They get the feedback, and a lot of times, like I think Jody, you might have mentioned, the other teams can give feedback. For example, I've actually had students present and give Post-it notes to each person in there, and they can give feedback, and then I pass it to the team, and that way it's anonymous. And it's helpful, and it also helps the students learn to give positive and helpful feedback.
Yeah, that's such an important professional skill, isn't it? They are very used to receiving feedback, but the more they are often going to end up in positions where they have to give feedback to their colleagues, and learning how to do that professionally. Thank you for raising that, a really important point.
Yeah, and even in graduate level work, it's great to break that big final summative assessment into smaller pieces and have different checkpoints throughout. It's extremely important for our younger students who are learning time management and everything else, but with our grad students, they often have lives and they're busy, so having those different points with feedback really helps build, and it also helps you if you need to grade at the end. So instead of grading 15 huge projects, you're looking at those final projects and seeing what revisions were made, and maybe a reflection on the process from the student as opposed to the project itself. And to Mary's point, that feedback point from peers is really important, and I've seen that executed online using like a Qualtrics survey or something like that. So you can collect all of the feedback, remove the students' names, and then distribute it to the different teams.
One of the,
yeah.
Oh, if I could add, one of the difficulties when you're first starting out and we say, okay, build a rubric for grading, that can get really difficult when you have a lot of papers to grade.
Yeah.
So I think it's really good to give very clear instructions up front, and then they know why they lost those points, because maybe you can ask them to edit before they turn it in using the points you've given them, because using those rubrics and trying to adjust points and be fair for everybody takes a long time, and we all have larger classes now than ever before.
Mm-hmm.
So I started out with rubrics. I suffered through rubrics, and now I just give steps for editing.
Yeah, and I think we use the word rubric, and it can mean lots of different things. I mean, there's the traditional one that we showed there with the different criteria, etc., which can still be helpful even if you're not using it as a grading tool per se, because you're showing the students what you're looking for and what types of things. But you might want to grade, give points, as you said, Mary, in a very different way from that as well. It is 1 minute past the hour, and I just wanted to check that Sergio, I thought I saw his hand up, and it might just be up from the last time. I just want maybe
no, I actually did have a question. I mean, I don't know if we have time or not.
Oh no, we get anybody who has to go, please feel free, and we just want to remind you that we're still here if you would like to chat about your particular situation.
I like Mary's idea about giving anonymous feedback from students, because in my evaluations, students were really upset by the feedback I gave them. Now, I'll take some ownership out of it because I'm fresh out of a PhD. I'm so used to getting beat up and thrown against. I mean, I have a thick skin, but I mean, I wanted to help them, but they like took it so the wrong way. I don't know what I did wrong, and especially in an online environment where I feel that seeing other people fail is important, and you giving feedback, how do you soften the blows there? Or I think what Mary said was really good. I'm going to try that, somehow figure out how to do that. But are there any other suggestions for feedback?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think you're right. It's hard to give. It's hard to give criticism, and it's hard to take criticism. In my opinion, in my experience, students can be even harsher in their feedback, which again, the other students kind of take that seriously a lot of the time. But there's that old kind of thing about when you're giving feedback. So I used to joke with my students that the art of diplomacy is telling people how to go to hell in such a way that they look forward to the journey. And so starting with this idea of, you did this really well. Here's things that I'm seeing. This was done really, the sandwich approach. You did this really well. Here's some ways that I think you need to focus on, or some suggestions for improvement, and then finishing it all off again by, I'm really pleased to see your enthusiasm and blah, blah, something like that. But just that kind of positive, here's the problem, positive, it takes the sting out sometimes.
I'd like to add to that, Margaret. It took me a lot of years to rephrase how I gave feedback. And now I get on my evaluations that they look forward each week to getting my notes. So
okay, we're going to have you run a session for us, Mary, on how to give feedback. I'm going to get your name down.
Well, I've read different things where sandwiching the bad news is not a good thing, but then I've read, you sandwich it with something good at the beginning and something good at the end.
Yeah.
So actually what I do is when I enter the grade, I give them a note. And you can actually make stock notes for each assignment. You can do a word page, and if they've got an A, this is what you tell them. And if they've missed the third point you ask for, there's a note there for that. And so I just start out thanking them for doing the assignment, if that's all I can thank them for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then I say going forward. So I never say you did something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I say going forward. Adding in the third item would have really enriched the paper.
Mm-hmm.
So they know they didn't add in that third point. I didn't have to say, you didn't do this. So I think that's made all the difference in the world. But there's actually a book called Difficult Conversations.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And you can pick up that little book or one similar to it. This one was by Harvard Negotiation Project. And it gives you all these little things never to say when you're giving criticism.
And for people with large classes, and as somebody said, they're all getting larger by the minute, giving that very itemized individual feedback to students can be overwhelming. That's all you're ever doing is grading, and then you give that back, then you start grading again.
I can grade 100 discussions that I've required 3 paragraphs in one day, giving notes because I've got them stocked over there on a sheet of paper, and I can just copy and paste. And then if they've got something wrong in the middle of it, I tell them what they've done wrong. Lovely. Going forward, I never say, you didn't do this. I just say going forward, remember to put the references at the end, or whatever it is. And so they know what they did wrong. Wonderful. And they'll even say that they appreciated the feedback that I gave so that they improved over the semester. Fantastic. But that took me 20 years, Sergio, so don't feel bad.
And also, it's great if you find that you are saying the same thing over and over, as Mary says, saving some of those for future that you can bring out again, but also just as you're working towards that eventual goal of having all these different notes that are readily stocked, saying, as a class, here are the things that were done really, really well. Here are some things that most students missed, or here are some things that you might want to focus on later. Again, it would have improved it if you had done it this way, etc. So you can give a larger, especially if it's a formative type of thing, you can give a group feedback for students who, if you have 150 students or 250 students in your class, that can be challenging. Okay.
Just one other thing I've seen work well for certain courses is giving audio feedback. So a lot of times students will read things and hear it in whatever voice they choose to hear it in, but when things are delivered with your voice, they can come across a little bit softer. So I don't know if that's something you'd be interested in, but I've worked with some faculty who find it quicker, so they don't have to type it up prior to the 20 years of building up your your responses. But even I think keeping that list of common errors or common things people do really well is great for any assignment to just kind of pull from and plug in. But audio or even video, if you're comfortable doing that, can help students kind of receive that a little in a softer way.
Okay. Oh, I thought just as a last question, I think Tony has had his hand up. If he's still here, he might have had to go. No, there he is.
No. I was literally, as an English professor who grades 4,000 pages a semester, I was going to hop in on the ways to respond. To Sergio, I often let them know where I'm coming from as a person. I'm an angry, depressed, gruff SOB. And so they see my comments often very endearing as I'm yelling at them. And it can be really funny. And then when you really praise something, if you praise, I'm the opposite sandwicher. You screwed up this. I don't know where you got this from. Why are you doing this? Man, this was amazing. And then have a good day. They actually really respond to the praise when it comes because they know it's not a technique, that it's authentic. You did the job amazingly here. The other thing that I found really successful is they write 2 to 5 pages a week for my class, and I respond to all of it, all of my classes. And I'm a regional faculty member with 4 classes. So you can imagine, I have no life. Anyways, I find that doing responses to 2 or 3 assignments at once has been just transformative. So I can say, I'm responding to your work from the last 3 weeks, and on this assignment you did this, and this assignment, oh, you had the same problem 3 times, let's talk about it. Or, man, you are amazing at doing this consistently. And that can be a really fun way. And as Jody said, I'll often do those verbally, or actually I video often those responses. And sometimes they can get pretty long, but if you're worried about students reading you as a faculty member as being harsh or aggressive or not quite being as caring, I really think just letting them know exactly your personal style has just, and again, I've been doing this for 20 years now, has been transformative. And it's taken away a lot of the anxiety of, oh my God, they're going to hate me so much for being aggressive with them. And by aggressive, I just mean telling them what they do. Of course,
yeah. I think that is such an important point you raised, Tony, about when we're giving feedback, it's not just being authentic in the feedback, it's being authentic to who we are and what ways that we interact with our students. And that climate that, you know, when you're sharing who you are with the students, you're setting this environment that is very makes you approachable, even if you are grumpy, even if you're known as a really tough grader, even if, you know, all of that, people will then relate to you as an individual, and they won't compare you to the way Jody would give feedback, because Jody's Jody and they know who she is. And I think that's such an important point. So thank you for doing that. Never be afraid to be you in the class and be obviously you. All right, well, this was fantastic discussion at the end. And so, but we have gone well past your time, and we really do know that, I don't know why I say this is a busy time of the semester, because it's always a busy time of the semester, but classes do start on Monday, and I know there's last minute syllabus changes or, you know, course assignment changes, or who knows what you're all dealing with. So we really appreciate you taking the time to share your wisdom with us, and we look forward to supporting you if we possibly can. Best of luck with the semester.